Welcome, everyone. We are really thrilled to have you sitting at the table with us today.
Absolutely.
If you're the kind of person who constantly craves a deeper understanding of the world, someone who wants to thoroughly master complex topics without getting bogged down in just an ocean of dry academic trivia, you are exactly where you need to be.
You were in the right place.
Yeah, consider yourself the third participant in our conversation today. So today we are immersing ourselves in one of the most significant foundational blueprints of the American government. We're talking about Federalist number 78.
Yes.
And this fascinating piece was penned by Alexander Hamilton, who was writing under the legendary pseudonym Publius, and it first made its way into the world via Maclean's edition in New York.
It really is a masterpiece of political architecture. I mean, it's just brilliant. And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack the underlying philosophy and really the starkly practical arguments behind the design of the Judiciary Department and the proposed United States government.
Yeah.
We'll be specifically exploring Hamilton's rationale for why judges are appointed for life and how they were meticulously engineered to serve as the ultimate constitutional referees.
Which is a huge topic.
It is. But before we dive into the mechanics of the text, I should probably offer a quick note on our approach today to you, our listener.
Oh, yeah, good point.
While this document deals intimately with the foundational politics of the American Republic, our objective today is strictly analytical.
Strictly analytical.
Right. We are examining Hamilton's arguments exactly as they exist in this historical text, impartially and objectively. We aren't endorsing any modern political viewpoints or taking partisan sides. We are simply your guides to the ideas as they were originally set down on paper.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because right out of the gate, Hamilton makes a claim that completely caught me off guard.
I know exactly which one you mean.
Right, because when we think of the federal judiciary or the Supreme Court, we tend to picture this massive, impenetrable powerhouse that just dictates the law of the land. But Hamilton argues the exact opposite. He states quite bluntly that the judiciary is, and I quote, beyond comparison the weakest of the three departments of power.
It definitely sounds counterintuitive to a modern ear, but Hamilton's logic is grounded in a very, very precise definition of power.
Okay, how so?
Well, in a system where government powers are separated into different branches, he argues the judiciary is inherently the least dangerous to the political rights enshrined in the Constitution.
Ah, the least dangerous.
Exactly. The reason is purely structural. The courts simply possess the least capacity to actively injure those rights.
Yeah, he breaks this down by categorizing the types of power each branch wields, and he uses this highly memorable imagery.
The sword and the purse.
Yes. He points out that the executive branch dispenses honors and, crucially, holds the sword of the community, meaning the executive controls the actual physical force.
The military, the police power.
Right, the force needed to enforce the state's will. Then you have the legislature. They command the purse.
The money.
They control the wealth, the taxes, and they write the actual rules that regulate the duties and rights of every single citizen.
So the sword and the purse represent the two fundamental levers of state power, physical force, and economic control. The judiciary possesses neither.
Neither one.
The text explicitly points out that the courts have zero influence over either the sword or the purse. They cannot direct the strength of the society, and they cannot direct the wealth of the society.
So they can't force anyone to do anything, and they can't pay anyone to do anything.
Precisely. They are entirely incapable of taking any active resolution whatsoever. As Hamilton brilliantly phrases it, the judiciary has neither force nor will, but merely judgment.
Wait, having no force or will sounds almost useless from a functional standpoint. I mean, how can a branch of government actually function as a check and balance if it can't physically do anything on its own?
Oh, that vulnerability is exactly what Hamilton wants to highlight. And I have to bring this up because he pulls in a fascinating reference to drive the point home. There is this specific footnote in the text.
The Montesquieu one.
Yes, the Montesquieu footnote. It's so good. He references the French philosopher Montesquieu, specifically his work Spirit of Laws. And Montesquieu bluntly states that out of the three powers of government, the judiciary is next to nothing.
Next to nothing. That's harsh.
But think about the philosophical weight of that. Next to nothing. Because the courts are so naturally feeble, they exist in a perpetual state of danger. They are constantly at risk of being overpowered, intimidated, or completely absorbed by the other two branches.
Because they have no built-in defenses.
Right. Hamilton stresses that the courts are so weak, they literally depend upon the aid of the executive arm just to make their judgments effective. If the executive branch refuses to enforce a court's ruling, the court is essentially talking to an empty room.
That is wild. So if the judiciary is sitting there without a sword, without a purse, constantly in jeopardy of being bullied by lawmakers who control the treasury, and an executive who commands the military, it seems impossible for them to ever successfully attack the other branches.
Exactly. Liberty essentially has nothing to fear from the judiciary acting alone.
But that extreme fragility means the architects of the government had to figure out a way to artificially strengthen the courts so they could survive. Which leads us directly to the proposed solution in the text, the tenure of the judges.
Yes. To armor this naturally defenseless branch, the constitutional plan dictates a very specific condition of employment. All judges appointed by the United States are to hold their offices during good behavior.
So what does good behavior actually mean in the context of this document? Is that just a polite 18th century way of saying a lifetime appointment?
Effectively, yes. It translates to a lifetime appointment, barring some extreme impeachable misconduct.
Okay, that makes sense.
And Hamilton notes that this standard was already the gold standard in the most approved state constitutions at the time, particularly New York's. He elevates this concept, calling it one of the most valuable modern improvements in the practice of government.
Why is it so valuable?
Well, in a monarchy, lifetime tenure serves as an excellent barrier against the despotism of the prince. But in a republic, it serves a different, equally vital function. It acts as a barrier against the encroachments and oppressions of the representative body.
The legislature.
Exactly.
To put this in modern terms for you listening, imagine trying to officiate a championship game where the players on the field also happen to sign your paychecks.
That would be a disaster.
Right. If the legislature or the executive branch could simply fire the judge the moment a ruling goes against them, the entire concept of constitutional limits completely dissolves.
The rules would mean nothing.
The referee would just start making calls to appease the people in power rather than applying the rules fairly. Hamilton doesn't mince words here. He calls this permanency in office an indispensable ingredient. He vividly refers to it as the citadel of the public justice and the public security.
That citadel imagery is highly deliberate. Constructing an unassailable fortress for the courts is uniquely essential in what Hamilton defines as a limited constitution.
A limited constitution.
Yes. He means a constitution that contains explicit exceptions to the legislative authority. It outlines specific things lawmakers are simply not allowed to do.
Yeah, Hamilton points out that the Constitution explicitly forbids things like bills of attainder. That's where the legislature just declares someone guilty of a crime without a trial.
Right, which is incredibly dangerous.
Or ex post facto laws, which make something illegal retroactively so you can punish someone for something they did when it was still perfectly legal. But those written limitations mean absolutely nothing if there isn't a completely independent court willing to enforce them. If a legislature passes an illegal law, the courts have to step in and declare it void.
And that duty to declare unconstitutional acts void introduces a massive philosophical friction point that Hamilton has to navigate in the text.
Because of the optics of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Critics of the proposed constitution seized on this. They argued that if you give the courts the power to pronounce legislative acts void, you are inherently implying that the judiciary is superior to the legislative power.
Which would upset the balance.
Right. Their argument was that the authority possessing the power to void the acts of another must necessarily be superior to the one whose acts are being voided.
I mean, logically, that makes sense. If the court can strike down these laws, doesn't that inherently make the court more powerful than the legislature? Walk me through Hamilton's logic there, because it sounds like a paradox. How can the courts overrule the legislature without actually being superior to them?
Hamilton dismantles that critique by recalibrating the entire hierarchy of power. He argues that the judiciary's ability to strike down a law does not mean the judges are superior to the lawmakers.
Then what does it mean?
What it actually means is that the people are superior to both of them.
Oh, I love that. He uses these fantastic, grounded analogies to illustrate the chain of command here. He says, you cannot logically claim that a deputy is greater than his principal.
Exactly.
You cannot claim that a servant is above his master. And by extension, you cannot claim that the elected representatives of the people are somehow superior to the people themselves.
The underlying mechanism is agency. Every act of a delegated authority, like a legislature passing a law that contradicts the commission under which it is exercised, is inherently void.
Because they stepped outside their assigned role.
Right. The Constitution is the fundamental law. It represents the original supreme will and intention of the people who created the government. A standard statute passed by the legislature merely represents the temporary will of the people's agents.
The agents, right.
Therefore, if there is an irreconcilable conflict between the two, if the agent's law attempts to override the principal's constitution, the one with the superior obligation must prevail. The judges aren't elevating their own will above the legislature. They are simply acting as the mechanism that enforces the will of the people over the unauthorized will of their agents.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Hamilton goes on to explore the intellectual puzzle of how courts actually resolve conflicting rules in practice.
This is a great section.
Let's say you have two regular statutes, two ordinary laws passed by the legislature at different times, and they completely clash with each other. The text explains the standard rule of construction that courts use to figure out which one applies. The last in order of time is preferred to the first.
Yes, the standard rule.
So the newer law automatically overrides the older law, assuming they both originate from an equal legislative authority.
Hamilton acknowledges that this is a perfectly rational rule adopted by the courts. When you are dealing with interfering acts of an equal authority, the most recent indication of their will gets the preference.
Right.
But he quickly pivots to explain that when you are dealing with a subordinate act and a superior act, like a temporary law passed by Congress clashing with the foundational Constitution itself, that standard rule is completely inverted.
The rule flips backward.
It has to. Hamilton argues that the nature and reason of the thing teach us that the prior act of a superior authority ought to be preferred to the subsequent act of an inferior authority.
The Constitution is the prior superior act.
Yes, the unconstitutional law is the subsequent inferior act. Therefore, it is the strict duty of the judicial tribunals to adhere to the Constitution and disregard the conflicting statute entirely.
Which brings us right back to why we need these judges to wear the armor of permanent tenure. It requires an incredibly independent spirit for a judge to look a powerful group of lawmakers in the eye and say, no, your new law is inferior to the old Constitution.
It takes immense courage.
But the text reveals that this isn't just about lawmakers making innocent drafting errors. Hamilton dives deep into some rather dark human psychology here, focusing on the need to protect minorities from what he refers to as ill humors.
The concept of ill humors infecting a society is a recurring anxiety in Hamilton's writing. He warns that the arts of designing men, or the unique influence of particular historical conjunctures, can easily disseminate these toxic humors among the general public.
So he's talking about mob mentality.
He is essentially describing the mechanics of a majoritarian panic. The public can become entirely consumed by a momentary inclination, demanding immediate actions or laws that are fundamentally incompatible with the provisions of the Constitution.
And even if you assume those intense public passions will eventually burn out and give way to better information and deliberate reflection, the damage can be done in the meantime.
Absolutely.
While the panic is active, it can cause incredibly dangerous innovations in the government and result in serious oppressions of the minor party in the community.
The text is careful to acknowledge the foundational Republican right of the people to alter or abolish their constitution if they choose to do so.
Sure, through amendments.
But Hamilton draws a hard line. Until the people actually change the Constitution through a solemn, authoritative, and legal act, the existing document is absolutely binding on everyone collectively and individually.
No exceptions for public outrage.
None. A sudden, intense public panic does not grant elected representatives a free pass to violate the Constitution just to appease the mob, and it certainly doesn't obligate the courts to conveniently look the other way.
Think about the immense personal fortitude it takes for a judge to stand up as the faithful guardian of the Constitution when the invasion is being actively cheered on by the vast majority of the community.
It's a terrifying position to be in.
When the entire public is screaming for a specific, unjust law, the judge has to be the one to slam the gavel and say, no, this violates the fundamental rights of the minority. You simply cannot expect a human being to do that if they are terrified about running for re-election or begging the legislature to renew their temporary commission.
It is the ultimate safeguard for individual rights. But the text reveals an even more profound layer to this dynamic. Hamilton suggests that the presence of an independent, permanent judiciary creates a psychological chilling effect on the legislature itself. This might be Hamilton's ultimate masterstroke of invisible governance.
Wait, does the text imply that this independence actually changes how lawmakers behave behind closed doors before a bad law is even passed?
Precisely that. The independence of the judges doesn't merely moderate the immediate mischiefs of unjust laws that have already found their way onto the books. It actively operates as a preemptive check upon the legislative body. When lawmakers who are secretly meditating on some partisan injustice realize that the courts are waiting as an immovable obstacle, they are compelled to qualify their attempts.
I help back.
Yes, the mere threat of judicial review forces bad actors to tone down their iniquitous intentions. Hamilton observes that this invisible psychological deterrent has vastly more influence upon the character of our governments than most people realize.
I really want you, the listener, to reflect on this and consider why this system is so vital to your own life. Because the text drops an incredibly profound warning about the shifting winds of power. It says, "No man can be sure that he may not be tomorrow the victim of a spirit of injustice by which he may be a gainer today."
That sentence encapsulates the entire philosophy of constitutional protection. Today, you might happen to reside in the comfortable majority. You might even benefit personally from an unjust law targeting someone else.
But the political winds change.
They are notoriously fickle. Tomorrow, you could easily find yourself cast into the minority, staring down the barrel of that exact same spirit of injustice. If that partisan spirit is permitted to sap the foundations of public and private confidence, it introduces a state of universal distrust and distress.
And the only way to stop that is with these permanent judges.
Inflexible and uniform adherence to constitutional rights can only realistically be expected from judges who hold their offices permanently. If the executive or the legislature appointed them on a temporary basis, human nature dictates there would be an improper complacence to the branches controlling their livelihood.
They just do whatever the president or Congress wanted.
Exactly. And if the people elected them directly, judges would possess too great a disposition to consult immediate popularity rather than the permanent constitution.
So we've established that judges need lifetime tenure to withstand immense political pressure and resist sudden public panics. But Hamilton pivots beautifully here, arguing that they also need lifetime tenure for a much more mundane, highly practical reason.
Yes, the nature of the job.
The sheer grueling difficulty of the job itself. And ironically, he says this difficulty stems directly from what he calls the folly and wickedness of mankind. I have to laugh a bit because clearly human nature hasn't changed a bit since 1788.
It really hasn't. The final argument in the text shifts away from political philosophy and focuses on the rigorous intellectual demands placed on the judiciary. Hamilton notes that a voluminous, incredibly complex code of laws is simply one of the unavoidable inconveniences connected to the advantages of a free government.
If we want to live in a free government, we can't allow judges to operate on arbitrary discretion. They can't just walk into a courtroom and dole out punishments based on their personal feelings that day.
We need written rules.
They have to be rigidly bound down by strict rules and a massive web of precedents that dictate their exact duty in every conceivable situation.
And because of the endless, chaotic variety of controversies that constantly sprout from the folly and wickedness of mankind, the records of those precedents swell to a massive bulk over time.
Just a mountain of legal history.
Exactly. Hamilton points out that simply understanding this labyrinth of case law demands long and laborious study.
It sounds like you essentially have to be a walking encyclopedia of legal history just to be a baseline competent judge.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Hamilton is laying out a stark, undeniable economic reality. Because the job requires such an overwhelming amount of rigorous study, there are naturally very few people in the society who actually possess sufficient skill in the laws to qualify for the station.
That makes sense.
Now, when you filter that already tiny pool by factoring in the ordinary depravity of human nature, the number of individuals who manage to unite the requisite integrity with the requisite knowledge is infinitesimally small.
Finding someone who possesses top-tier legal brilliance, exhaustive historical knowledge, and unimpeachable personal honesty is essentially like hunting for a unicorn.
Exactly. The government simply does not have an endless reservoir of fit characters to draw from. Now, imagine a scenario where the job of being a federal judge was only a temporary 5-year commission.
Okay, setting the scene.
Most of these top-tier legal minds are already incredibly successful. They are making substantial fortunes in their private practice. Why on earth a brilliant lawyer voluntarily abandon a highly lucrative line of practice to take a temporary high-stress seat on the bench, fully knowing they will be out of a job and forced to rebuild their private career in a few short
I
years?
wouldn't. The text forcefully argues that a temporary duration in office would actively discourage the absolute best characters from accepting the job.
It's just bad economics.
And the inevitable result, the administration of justice would be thrown into hands that are vastly less able and less well qualified to conduct it with the necessary utility and dignity. You would essentially be relying on the B team to run the most vital defensive citadel of the republic.
Hamilton concludes that the compounding disadvantages of temporary tenure would be far more disastrous than they might appear at first glance. He argues there is no room to doubt that the Constitutional Convention acted wisely in copying the models that established good behavior as the tenure for judicial offices.
The ultimate armor.
Without that specific armor, he claims the entire plan would have been inexcusably defective. He even points across the ocean, citing the experience of Great Britain as an illustrious historical comment on the excellence of the institution of lifetime tenure.
So what does this all mean? Let's draw all these intricate threads together. When we immerse ourselves in Federalist No. 78, we discovered that the judiciary isn't designed to be some all-powerful dictatorial ruling body. By deliberate, careful design, it is structurally the weakest branch of the government.
The very weakest.
It possesses no physical force, it controls no money, it cannot even enforce its own will, it operates solely on judgment. But precisely because it is so fragile, and because it serves as the solitary fortress standing between the fundamental rights of the people and the overreaching ambition of lawmakers or the sudden dangerous panics of the public, the judges require indestructible armor.
And that armor is lifetime tenure.
Good behavior. That permanency is the only mechanism that allows them to independently strike down unconstitutional laws, psychologically deter bad legislation before it happens, protect the minority from momentary public passions, and attract the absolute finest legal minds away from lucrative private wealth to serve the public good. It is an incredibly delicate, absolutely brilliant balancing act.
It is a remarkable piece of institutional engineering, but as Hamilton admits, it relies heavily on a delicate ecosystem of mutual respect among the branches. This raises an important question, one that Hamilton essentially bakes right into the core premise of his argument, even if he doesn't fully resolve the darkest implications of it.
Oh, where are we going with this?
He explicitly wrote that the courts have zero force of their own and must ultimately depend upon the aid of the executive arm, even for the efficacy of its judgments. So here's a provocative thought for you to ponder on your own as you digest all of this. If the ultimate defense of our constitutional rights relies entirely on a branch with no physical power whatsoever, what happens to that impenetrable citadel of public justice if the executive branch simply decides to ignore a court's ruling?
Wow. That is definitely a heavy, lingering thought to chew on. It perfectly highlights how fragile even the most brilliantly designed systems can be in practice. Well, that brings us to the end of our time at the table today. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly thorough deep dive into Federalist No. 78. We genuinely love unpacking these complex foundational ideas with you, and we encourage you to keep bringing that same level of curiosity to everything you encounter. Till next time, keep learning.